father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader.
Anakin Skywalker, a character that is very popular amongst the fandom, but that was never the case when he first appeared on screen in the Phantom Menace. And yes, I'm talking about pre-Darth Vader, as Vader already became that icon from the moment he entered in New Hope, but I'm more so referring to the man behind the mask, that being Anakin Skywalker. When George first announced that he was going to make the prequels revolving around the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the decimation of the Jedi Order back in 1994, you could say that there were high expectations going in. Well, the results were actually very undeniably negative. Fans poured out their criticisms, claiming Anakin was too whiny and immature. The only film that somewhat received a positive reception for the character was Revenge of the Sith. That would be the last film George would ever direct, as he said, "Why would I make any more when everybody yells at you all the time and says what a terrible person you are?" Seems reasonable. He ultimately worked behind the scenes, finding ways to expand his vision of a galaxy far, far away. He orchestrated several spin-offs such as the Clone Wars, and LucasArts hired many companies to transcend their stories through games such as Republic Commando, Revenge of the Sith, the video game, or the OG Battlefront 2. But for this video, I'll be breaking down Anakin's character and his chosen one arc, so that would be the first 6 films. Plus, this analysis will include the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Kenobi, as those shows give a much more wider aspect of Anakin's character and his perspective on many state of affairs. So let's dive on in.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
In order to fully break down Anakin's story, we must go back to where his story began. Yes, the Phantom Menace, not A New Hope. As I won't be going in order of when the films were released, but in the order of Anakin's life, so we begin with his story as a young boy from Tatooine. Now, when the film was released, the Phantom Menace received an uproar of baggage for George's intended target to start Anakin's story.
What's that name say? Jake Lloyd. What if go to hell?
The 3 common complaints for the character were: 1. He's way too annoying. 2. A Gary Sue, equivalent to Mary Sue but for males. 3. Should have started him as a Padawan, not as a child. The more common complaint for Anakin is he's way too maddening. It is a trait which is even consistent throughout these films for creating a backstory to the world's most iconic villain, who's merely a cold, calculated, and vile. You'd think him being very annoying would be the last thought someone would have of the character, but to rebuttal this claim, we have to look at it from a different perspective. What I mean by that is the perspective of Skywalker himself, a boy who's raised on a desert planet with a single parent, his mom, and is a slave to Watto. Anakin probably never walked out of the city of Mos Espa, and when he stumbles upon Qui-Gon and the gang, his curiosity comes into play, and instantly realizing they're not from here, questions everything about them, something a kid would probably do if he or she saw something out of the ordinary. Hell, if I was a kid and saw a lightsaber, I'd be curious and intrigued to ask questions. Why are you here? What is it like to be a Jedi? Do you kill people with a glowy stick? Feels much more realistic than to have a kid with not so wide of a perspective of the entire galaxy.
You're a Jedi Knight, aren't you?
Now let's look at the second argument. He's a Gary Sue, which I consider to be completely false. Many bring up the simple taste of killing a massive group of people at such a young age with no experience of flight as a criticism. Well, to rebuttal this, when he enters the N1 Starfighter, Anakin is already fiddling with the controls. He even questions many of its aspects, which leads him to starting the ship and putting him in a situation that he has no control of.
Oops, wrong one. Maybe this one.
Remember, Anakin had experience with ship parts. The movie clearly established his entire work is based around machinery. That even includes droids, hence building C-3PO. You also have to take into account that he was 50% in autopilot, pressing random controls, forcing Art to do the heavy lifting for most of the flight. As for him entering the ship's core and triggering the explosion, you can pretty much call it luck, or in Star Wars terms, the will of the Force. But like I said, the film clearly establishes Anakin not being aware on how to 100% properly operate such a ship. The final criticism for the character in the film is they should have started him off as a Padawan, not as a child. You can call this more of a branch to the first criticism, but look, George created the prequels to give us a better understanding on how Anakin felt. Many have suggested Attack of Clones should have been the start of the trilogy, and I guess Revenge of the Sith to be split in 2 parts. Now, if we took the Phantom Menace out, Attack of Clones would be much more worse than it probably already was for many. because of this one scene, a well-crafted scene which is carried by the events from Phantom Menace. His relationship in the movie with his mom is very significant, considering she's the only parent he has in his life. No father, but his life goes into another direction, which results in him leaving his mother to train with Qui-Gon. But obviously that is very cut short, considering Qui-Gon dies in the movie, and he passes the torch to Obi-Wan to train him.
You will be a Jedi, I promise.
Qui-Gon was very supportive of Anakin and his feelings and respected them throughout the film, in which many Jedi have refuted against. So the moment Qui-Gon found out he had no father, he strived to learn about this kid he stumbled upon on a desert planet. It was the midichlorian count being significantly high, he became positive that this boy carried something special and is related to this foretold prophecy to find that the Jedi had many imaginative stories on.
Is the chosen one. He will bring balance.
The movie that fans claim to have rivaled Shakespeare dialogue. Nah, I'm kidding. Yeah, the dialogue is booty.
Being around her again is intoxicating.
As someone who is a big fan of his character, this film seemingly left a mixed feeling in my head. I like some parts of his character and I detest the execution of a very nice concept. The film wraps you in seeing how much Anakin has transitioned from a little boy on Tatooine who's had this wild dream of leaving that godforsaken hellhole, and one day to free his mother, to a confused boy that is held back because he isn't allowed to express his feelings towards a woman he's had a crush on in the moment they met. Why? Because the Jedi have this code which no Jedi shall express attachments with anyone, although Ki-Adi-Mundi has like 10 wives. I'm definitely exaggerating here, but he does have a lot due to the fact his species has a very low birth rate. So the Jedi have taken that as an exception. Anakin throughout the movie claims the Jedi hold him back due to his potential as power, and him being the chosen one.
He's holding me back!
Their poor judgment of him isn't allowing him to accomplish the goals he desires. Like I mentioned earlier, freeing his mother is one of them. A promise he made back in the Phantom Menace, which he wasn't able to achieve as she died in his arms from all the gruesome injuries he suffered from the Tusken Raiders. The emotion from this scene was carried by the Phantom Menace, as before he left his mother and said their goodbyes, he made a promise that he would return to free her. This correlates later as he buries Shmi, and Anakin wishes he was powerful enough to save her.
I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom. I miss you. So much.
Later on, he scolds himself angrily, telling Padme what transpired back at the camp. Now, nothing wrong with Anakin lashing out as he's in the heat of the moment. The issue is with Padme, not seeing any red flags in his actions. He just admitted to murdering an entire Tusken clan. Not just the men, but the women and the children. And yes, the scene is supposed to illustrate what Anakin did was wrong, despite being justified at the same time.
I killed them all. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
But still, really red flags are being showed here. Dude just openly admitted to mass murder, and it doesn't give a good look when Padme is beginning to fall in love with him despite learning this small amount of genocide he's committed. I guess she has some sort of kink or something, despite her being somewhat of a pacifist. The relationship certainly doesn't feel believable.
I don't like sand.
Now, if I was the writer, personally, he should have hidden his dark deeds from her. A valid reason for this, he doesn't want to jeopardize his role in the Jedi Order, nor doesn't want to be kicked for his actions if the information ever got out. On the plus side, this adds more to his dark side descent as he isn't able to express how he feels towards the ones he cares about without feeling any sort of rejection. Because in Revenge of the Sith, when he confesses his massacre of the Jedi Order, Padme doesn't believe this. It's a very big head scratcher because this shouldn't be something new for Padme at all.
Not Anakin. He couldn't.
Throughout the movie, he's pretty much eyeing her, being protective of her, even though she sees him as a friend at the start. Yeah, the movie progresses them into loving each other, and it can't come off as forced, weird, and creepy, and cringe at the same time. But the entire purpose was to illustrate how strong of a bond Anakin has with those he cares about deeply. That being Padme and the relationship the driving force when it comes to Revenge of the Sith. A trend in this trilogy when a good concept becomes widely open for easy criticisms for its execution because there's a lot of dumb shit and a lot of weird questionable aspects in their relationship and even in the story as well.
Please don't look at me like that.
Why not?
I know I'm butchering Attack of Clones a whole lot here, and I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't think his relationship with Obi-Wan in this movie was very justified. Remember when in A New Hope, Obi-Wan said all these lines sounding like a broken record, I know I am?
good friend.
The movie does a very poor representation of their bond, because in the movie Anakin's always expressing how much Kenobi holds him back, but we never get that much brotherly moments with them. It doesn't stay true to those words Obi-Wan said in A New Hope. It's more sounding Obi-Wan was a grumpy teacher to his student, with not much moments where the two aren't discussing about Jedi topics, but more of their feelings towards one another. Let's get that little bit bickering in there as well. You know, it kind of creates more of that, hey, these guys have been friends for a long time. These two know each other very well. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes, was when Anakin and Obi-Wan were regarding Padme. They actually talk about things that don't resolve around being a Jedi, or Anakin doing something stupid. Anakin actually expresses himself to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan tries to guide him. That's a moment that works very well. Yes, Obi-Wan's attempt at being a master to Anakin is a factor to why Anakin fell, but George could have developed a bit more instead of relying on the Clone Wars to do that development for them.
How many times I told you? Stay away from Pop!
The Clone Wars, a show that quite frankly improves on a lot of the aspects of Anakin that felt very underdeveloped, and added more to his character, in which many of us believe that we didn't need but are glad to have now. Yes, the micro-series does exist for you to watch, but sadly it's no longer canon to the story, which sucks because there's amazing elements that I wished made it into the new Clone Wars, one of them being the trials of becoming a Jedi Knight, which would have benefited his character of him working hard to secure that position amongst the ranks, instead of him jumping and claiming he's a knight now, even though a season ago, and still a Padawan. Feels weird considering you have to be ready to become a master, and the council grants you that position, as we see in Revenge of the Sith. Would have been neat to see that sort of transition, which delves more into the Jedi culture. But when it came to the Clone Wars, the entire intent behind it was to further Anakin's character, polishing aspects in which the prequels struggled to do so. Yes, it was disliked by many at first because of poor decisions behind the scenes, like why would you decide to cram 4 episodes into a movie and release it on the big screen as a way to introduce the show? You're bound to have a messy plot. The score was good, but oh boy, that plot felt like a current Michael Bay movie. An in-Korean mess filled with a lot of action, which the Clone Wars movie was pretty much. Although it was a convoluted mess, it also introduced another character that many have actually hated at the start, and that would be Ahsoka Tano. Now, George wanted to develop Anakin away from that cocky, arrogant Padawan we saw in Attack of the Clones, giving him a responsibility that will usher him into a more mature knight, but that does not mean he ditched it all, as you will see in Revenge of the Sith on why. Ahsoka obviously develops a brother and sister relationship with Anakin, and both deeply care for each other's safety, as in the episode where she was kidnapped by a Trandoshan, Anakin isn't concerned about anything else, not even about the war, but his Padawan's safety. And a similar situation occurred for Ahsoka when Anakin was critically injured in a battle. She wouldn't leave his side despite many lessons from Aayla Secura telling her to learn to let go of her master. That is what the Clone Wars did very well. It gave that line from A New Hope that Obi-Wan stated hold a bit more significance and value for Anakin as a character, because the prequels barely showed that side of Anakin. The only care he ever gave was towards his mom, Padme, and very bits of Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones. He is someone that doesn't hold his emotions back, something that's brought on over from Attack of the Clones. As an example, that would be the Zagarian arc, when Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and Anakin go on a mission to free the missing colonists from Zagarian slavers. Now, from Attack of the Clones and the Phantom Menace, we learn that Anakin has a tough history as he was a slave himself. So his anger to act aggressive against the Zagarian scum, as he called them, is completely understandable. If Obi-Wan or even Ahsoka weren't there, they could have seen a Tusken Raider Massacre 2.0. But obviously Obi-Wan calms him down in that situation before he can even act out on his anger. He clearly doesn't think before he acts, which ultimately leads to his downfall in the end of it. It's been a consistent trait of his. Sort of when in Attack of the Clones facing Dooku, he rushed into battle instead of coming up with a competent strategy to ultimately take down Count Dooku. Instead, he got a strike of lightning to the body and his hand was chopped off. Play stupid games and win stupid prizes is always his end result when he ever goes in without thinking. The Clone Wars took place in the span of 3 years. The clones were separated into battalions, in which Anakin led the 501st Battalion, which had blue markings. He developed more than just a general and his soldiers. He bonded and he deeply cared for his men. He knew when to back off when his team was outmanned. He has the ability to strategize and be effective most of the time, and which has been greatly appraised by soldiers such as Captain Rex.
The general I fought with was among the greatest of the Jedi.
Who isn't just a soldier to General Skywalker, but a great friend. Both have trusted each other in the span of 3 years. By the end of it, Rex doesn't even know Anakin is Vader. If he ever did find out, the captain would be devastated to find out the great general he's fought along for years turned into a tyrant monster whose only mission is to dictate, control, and kill. But you can't say the same for Ahsoka after being framed and being blamed by the people who she thought were on her side. She left the Order and broke ties as a Padawan with Anakin Skywalker.
Look, Ahsoka. Huh? Forcing my way in would have made you look even more guilty.
I'm not going to take the fall for something I didn't do.
Trust me. Barriss Offee, member of the Jedi Order, and traitor.
During season 7, she comes back not to join the Order but to face Maul and strip him of his rule on Mandalore. Maul, when confronted, begins to mock Ahsoka of her false perception of the Order and their future, claiming the war was the beginning of their end and how much the Sith Lord has controlled both sides.
He is behind everything.
With your help, the Jedi can stop Sidious.
Too late? For what? The Republic to fall? It already has. The time of the Jedi has passed.
He even stabs her with the dagger that Anakin was his target to have a fuck you moment to Palpatine.
That I orchestrated this war to lure him here with Kenobi, thus depriving Sidious of his prized pupil.
He knew it all since the beginning and for once was telling the truth, but to sway the conflict to him, of course. Ahsoka, denying his arguments, doesn't back down and challenges him to a one-on-one duel. But once Maul is defeated, Palpatine's plan already came into fruition.
Let me go. Let me die. We're all going to burn. We're all going to die.
She believes Anakin is in trouble after hearing the echoes and cries from her master, but couldn't make out what happened. And she certainly couldn't get the information from Rex as Order 66 came into picture before she could even stop it. The final shot of the show holds so much more for the character of Anakin Skywalker. The idea of using the mask to tell the story is conveyed very well. Picking the lightsaber he gave her, you sense the defeat within him, and everything he cared for is truly burned. And all he can do is walk away. Revenge of the Sith, the movie where Anakin's past comes back to haunt him in the literal sense. From the Phantom Menace to the Clone Wars till now was to construct Anakin's descent to the dark side and let it all unfold. The movie opens up in a space battle above Coruscant. Anakin and Obi-Wan are to grab Palpatine, who's been captured by General Grievous. Now, what's so great about this entire opening sequence? Well, one, it's visually fantastic. The CGI is amazing for the time when the film was made. But the character of Anakin is portrayed the way fans hope to see him. That dialogue in New Hope when Obi-Wan was explaining how Anakin was this and that, well, this entire sequence pretty much sums it all up. Which is the minimum we get in this trilogy. They make it into the ship and go through the security and the droids and they encounter Dooku. Now Anakin mentions Dooku that his powers have doubled since the last time they met. Now it's either Anakin's being arrogant towards Dooku.
This time we will do it together. I was about to say that.
Or Anakin doesn't recall anything. If you watch the Clone Wars, they literally met like 3 months prior, most likely. That's more of a Dave Filoni writing error in my honest opinion. The fight comes to Anakin versus Dooku, and Anakin absolutely manhandles Dooku in the saber fight. I mean, he just outskills him.
Sense great fear in you, Skywalker.
With all his anger and his pride. He brings Dooku to his knees, and a sense of conflict is in Anakin whether he should arrest Dooku or decapitate him. Palpatine is toying with Anakin's mind, persuading him to go through with the kill. The blue and red lightsaber gives a demonstration of the clash in Anakin, the light and dark battle within him. This pretty much kickstarted Anakin's descent in the film itself. But things go south for them as Grievous ends up capturing them, but Anakin takes jabs at Grievous as this is their first ever encounter on screen.
General Grievous, you're shorter than I expected.
Which you gotta praise the Clone Wars on as they kept it consistent between the two, never meeting until Revenge of the Sith. Can't say the same about Dooku though. After a bit of trolling, they managed to get free, and luckily enough, the droids are completely incompetent as they don't know how to shoot a weapon. Oh, George. Grievous manages to escape and Battle of Coruscant is over, but this is where Anakin's life goes really downhill from here. Padme reveals to him that she is pregnant. He gives that look of ambivalence as he's pretty much stuck now, cause he knows if the Jedi ever find out that he's having a kid, or even being in a relationship with the senator, he can kiss his career as a Jedi goodbye, because he isn't Ki-Adi-Mundi. He doesn't have that exception that he can present. Oh, and then the downhill road doesn't end there, because George wants this guy to suffer a bit more. He gets a nightmare of Padme dying, and he's in panic mode for the rest of the movie. This is kind of what similar happened to with his mom when he had that vision of her pretty much calling for help and dying in his arms. And Palpatine, the smartass he is in this film, and let's hope he stays that way, keeps his eye on Anakin and begins to tug on his strings. But he isn't like direct like, hi, I'm a Sith, I can save your wife. That's not till like the climax of the movie. But he still drops those very vague hints. Like in the beautiful shot opera scene, he goes on about Darth Plagueis knowing the secret to achieve beyond death and using the story in a way to manipulate Anakin's emotions. To feel a sense of desperation and hope that there's an ability out there that can do him wonders and save Padme from death. Anakin does take Palpatine's story into his mind as a, as a safe route for him.
Not from a Jedi.
He indirectly questions the Jedi for hiding powers to him, so he goes on the council and is immediately denied the rank of master. As a Jedi master, you're able to go into the more depths of the Jedi temple and learn a bunch of secrets that the Jedi masters don't tell the younglings, Padawans, or even the knights.
Take a seat, young Skywalker.
A bunch of curveballs are just being thrown at Anakin. Anakin is just a bad batter. Leveling up his desperation, he begins to question his loyalty with the council, but according to Obi-Wan, this is all a plan to see what Palpatine is really trying to unravel here. Obviously, Palpatine, being the genius he is, was able to pull Anakin closer with him. Anakin immediately denies these claims that Obi-Wan is suggesting, and you begin to see the shift in Anakin's personality. He's more in denial. He doesn't want to hear what he should hear. You begin to question, what if Qui-Gon was here? Qui-Gon views somewhat of a similar perspective with Anakin. Both had doubts of the council and their ideals. Qui-Gon could have had a better understanding of what Anakin was going through since they shared the same perspective. Let's face it, Obi-Wan was a yes man to the council most of the time, never questioned nor had doubts. He may be the bigger brother to Anakin, but he was never able to understand the emotional pain Anakin was experiencing, or give any good advice to him. We see this in the Clone Wars and over here. After the council pretty much butchers Anakin's any chance of facing Grievous and ending the war, which Palpatine predicted, hence why he suggested that Anakin to lead the campaign. Very nice manipulation right there. The council suggests Obi-Wan to go to Utapau. That scene pretty much adds more to his downfall as a character, and we get this short yet powerful scene when both Anakin and Obi-Wan say their final goodbyes. Because this is the last time where Obi-Wan was truly saying goodbye to the brother he once knew.
May the Force be with you. Goodbye, old friend.
Anakin visits Palpatine as he was called in, and this is where it all starts. Palpatine immediately figures out that Anakin is tasked to spy on him, but the moment Anakin says,
I know there are things about the Force that they're not telling me.
This is where Palpatine sees an opening shot. Grievous was likely to be defeated. Yoda was on Kashyyyk. This was a perfect opportunity as two of the greatest Jedi Masters are not in the picture right now. Hell, any smart villain will just take the trigger and shoot their shot. He finally reveals himself, but to add salt to the wound of Anakin's, he mentions Padme's supposed death. Anakin immediately freezes. He immediately gets a second thought. He hates this dude that lied to him, but he's in desperation right now, where he's willing to do anything that's possible. This is where it all begins. He immediately goes to Mace Windu and suggests they tag team Palpatine in a fight, but Mace doesn't trust Anakin as he believes Palpatine has Anakin's emotions clouded, and he suggests that he waits in the council chambers. So Mace takes Kit Fisto, Master Kolar, and Master Tin to go and confront Palpatine. And oh my god, we're about to see an epic throwdown between Mace and Palpatine and the other Jedi Masters. This truly will be epic. And oh my god, oh Jesus, holy shit. The fuck did I just watch? So Mace takes these three Jedi who are powerful, and they get taken out like bitches. I mean, there's a lot of theories on how Palpatine defeated them, like with a scream, but it could have been choreographed much better, because the rest of the choreograph is just awful, and you can just see Ian McDiarmid, his age isn't really helping the entire choreography. So they brought in stunt doubles, and the CGI doesn't look all that great as well on his face. And yeah, Palpatine just doing these weird expressions, like it looks hilarious as fuck. Now we get to the best scene of Padme and Anakin's relationship. We get this cool and powerful shot of Anakin and Padme looking at each other. It's eerie music. Anakin's convoluted with thoughts and voices of Palpatine. But he finally breaks after tearing a bit. He immediately has his sick-looking speeder, and we immediately cut to Mace pinning Palpatine against the glass. Anakin enters in a weird way. Seems like George forgot to cut the scene, because for someone who seems to be in a hurry, weird way to enter in a hurry, and then you just start walking. Anyways, Mace has Palpatine pinned, but Anakin is trying his absolute hardest to convince Mace but Mace won't budge to listen, and Anakin just slashes Mace's hand, and Palpatine immediately does his power move and sends Mace out of the window. Realizing the sheer power Palpatine possessed and displayed on Mace, Anakin feels a sense of regret and guilt. He just committed treason, and Palpatine used this reasoning and manipulates Anakin to further on his side.
Thank you, my master.
Anakin pledges allegiance with Palpatine and immediately takes the 501st to perform an all-out assault on the Jedi, gunning them down one by one. Now there's an issue of how abrupt things transpire. Yeah, Anakin murders a bunch of children. Yeah, it does take away from us as an audience of redeeming Anakin, because he just goes off and murders a bunch of kids. Jesus, George, but the idea behind the scene was pretty clear. The kid Anakin confronts was supposed to be the representation of Vader murdering his former self when he first entered into that temple, as Anakin Skywalker. As a kid, is literally dressed to look like him. And actually a consistent trait in the entire trilogy of him trying to do anything that's possible to help him, to save the ones he loves. The film continues as Yoda and Obi-Wan head to the Jedi Temple and take out all the clones that are in there for security purposes. They make their way into the temple and witness the complete aftermath of the massacre, or as the film likes to call it, Operation Nightfall. Bunch of younglings and Padawans are on the floor, so these guys aren't the only ones he's killed. Scene cuts to another massacre sequence, but this time it's the Separatist leaders. About time. As commanded by Palpatine, Vader isn't showing any mercy. The eyes are turning Sith color. He doesn't give a fuck. He allows Viceroy to even beg and then slashes him. He's like a robot, isn't second thinking anything, taking commands without questioning. It's a great foreshadow of the man he will become. When he does show emotion, it's all in guilt. He knows he's gone too far. He wants to save the one person he truly cares about at the moment, and won't stop at nothing until he completes his mission. Anakin has been represented as this big respected hero and a friend, but we both don't believe he really committed these acts. After Obi-Wan tells Padme that unfortunately he has to kill him because he's become a very big threat to the entire galaxy, Padme doesn't tell him about his whereabouts.
Anakin is the father, isn't he? I'm so sorry.
But she proceeds to go to Mustafar and confront Anakin, and Obi-Wan cleverly follows her. Yoda confronts Palpatine and they square off in a fucking gorgeous, well-crafted fight. Now on Mustafar, Padme begins to tell Anakin that what she heard from Obi-Wan. Now although true, Anakin dismisses these claims to a certain degree, but as the pressure fumes, he begins to side with these claims, explaining from his perspective the Jedi are the one who turned on him. A big conflict ensues and things escalate drastically as he spots Obi-Wan, and despite of the heat of the moment, Anakin chokes Padme out of anger and frustration and blames it all on Obi-Wan. Clearly the manipulation given by Palpatine has really fucked up with his mind. To the point Obi-Wan is confused. Anakin embraces his arrogance and cockiness and challenges Obi-Wan.
You will try.
I think this very scene delves in the difference between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker. Luke approached Vader in a more calm, reasonable way when he learned that Vader was his father. Obviously before he went berserk, but the point still stands. Qui-Gon always viewed the Jedi's approach to situations very questionable, to the point he refused to be the member of the circle who makes decisions. He always viewed Anakin as something special. He cared for others. He would have given Anakin the wisdom he needed. Yoda tried, but it was a half-assed response, something Anakin didn't want to hear.
Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin.
Obi-Wan is questioning Anakin's claims throughout their fight, and he basically has given up on the boy he trained and shared a special bond with. Anakin, showing nothing but hatred and is believing he can outmatch his master in every way possible, pretty much becomes his downfall, as in the meme situation. He decides to jump over Obi-Wan, but it doesn't really end well, as he is now missing 2 of his legs and his hand. His overconfidence clearly got the better of him. Things go bad to worse for Anakin though, as he's burnt alive and screaming in hatred and anger and pain, while Obi-Wan looks at him in sadness, knowing that he failed and lost a very close friend, to the point he doesn't even want to kill him and finish him off, but leaves him to die. There was a deleted scene in where Anakin actually softly says, "Help me," as he's being burned alive, and I gotta say I'm glad they didn't add it in. I think that little hand gesture he gives is pretty much sums up the last desperate attempt to seek that help, in which Kenobi ultimately turns down and walks away from that very scene. Palpatine arrives, and although relieved that he's alive, you can feel he's very disappointed by the outcome of the situation. What a cool scenario, both didn't get what they hoped for. Sort of. Palpatine, after learning of Anakin's true potential, he became his desired goal, as explained in the words of Maul,
thus depriving Sidious of his prized pupil.
but the end result, he only receives the half the man he thrived for, while Anakin's actions cost the one he loved. Both failed to accomplish their true goals, but Palpatine's result was more of a half a goal completed. Because technically he eradicated the Jedi, something he planned on doing, but the apprentice he was striving for wasn't what he expected as the end result. A great intercut scenes is being presented as Padme is giving birth to Luke and Leia, meanwhile Vader is being born as machines are being operated on Anakin. As he screams not in pain but in anger and hate, the mask comes down, there's a sense of fear in his eyes, but before he can say anything, the mask attaches, we hear the breath of Darth Vader. And we see the death of Padme because she's lost the will to live. Now this next line of dialogue Vader, we get a classic George Lucas line, or you can even say classic George Lucas decision, that for some reason he loves to put in very emotional scenes, where it would be actually very perfect without any dialogue. Now in the way I would approach this scene, we get the same dialogue of him asking of Padme's whereabouts and her well-being. And the emotion completely shifts to him being in the pent of rage, yet he doesn't say anything. All we hear are grunts and breathing, but no words. He actually kneels down and bows his head in frustration. It's pretty much him basically submitting his entire life to the devil, or in this case, Palpatine. No BS. Just minimal dialogue and grunts and anger. Let the mask show the emotion, not the words. Anyways, Padme dies and the kids are separated and Vader is in the shackles of Darth Sidious. After Revenge of the Sith, we pretty much enter in Vader's era. I'll only be discussing where Vader's character is impacted, even if it in the slightest, so sorry Rogue One, you won't be in this one. I won't be even covering Vader's comics, as I merely am discussing this on-screen presence, which most people have seen. But I do recommend reading them as they're pretty freaking good, so the next time we see Vader is in the Kenobi show, in terms of timeline. Now I'm not particularly a big fan of the show and its handling of the character, but I'm covering what's canon and Kenobi digs in the early years of Darth Vader. As the show takes place 10 years after the events which have transpired in Revenge of the Sith, Vader is blinded by his defeat on Mustafar, and Kenobi has eluded him for so many years. His bloodlust to see his master suffer in front of him. That's a nice direction for Vader, but the problem I see for Vader is leaving an Inquisitor who knows of his history and name alive. That's not really something Anakin would do to, well, have his name be remembered. And not even that, he suspected that eventually she will betray him. Now I know for a fact Vader wouldn't jeopardize his life and the Empire for keeping someone with that motive alive and keeping her very close to him. And we also learned that Vader stabbed her in the torso. Surprisingly, she survived, so when the eventual betrayal occurs, he suspects it and plays with her in their duel. Typical Vader absolutely manhandles the Inquisitor, but at the end, it makes Vader look so much more stupid to leave her alive again after stabbing her in the torso for the second time. Even in New Hope, he tried to make sure Kenobi was dead despite disappearing in front of his eyes. The rematch of the century with Obi-Wan, Vader is far more aggressive. He's not a man of focus and acts like a smug in their fight. After being overmatched by someone who's distanced himself from the Force for so long, Kenobi has him on the defensive end. Kenobi with the leaping strike cuts off Vader's mask, revealing a jarring image which haunts Obi-Wan for many years to come. Obi-Wan giving his last go to bring his old pal back, but Vader has consumed Anakin far too much for any budge towards the light.
Anakin is gone. I am what remains, and my friend is truly dead.
This scene is great from Vader's perspective. For Kenobi, the fact that he left Vader and millions to die later is completely absurd, to be honest. Vader pretty much stated Anakin no longer exists. This gives Obi-Wan every reason to kill Vader on the spot. He even accepts it himself. Now that's a very bad look on Obi-Wan, to be honest. But I do love the fact that Vader becomes the man he was in Star Wars Rebels, Rogue One, the original trilogy of a man of focus. He only takes orders from Palpatine. He no longer cares about himself. Now on some better content. Star Wars Rebels, especially Season 2. In this season, Vader is on the hunt. After a failed attempt from the Grand Inquisitor, he notices a great threat emerging in the form of Ghost Crew. During the episode Siege of Lothal Part 1, Ahsoka and Kanan and Ezra are in a dogfight with Darth Vader. The three try to sense who it is. Ahsoka immediately recognizes it's her old master, and Vader finds out that
The apprentice lives.
Ahsoka obviously doesn't believe it's her former master until they square off in the final episode of the season, in a very emotional, heated battle. Vader's fighting style is more aggressive and stiff, not a lot of flexibility to his movement considering he's wearing his suit, which is basically nothing but pain for him. He no longer relies on Form 5 that he commonly used during the Clone Wars, but now relies on more power and his pent of rage. Vader was able to overcome his old apprentice and proceeded to pursue the holocron. And you can see Vader hasn't missed a beat despite what transpired in Revenge of the Sith. He almost retrieves what he needs until Ahsoka. Vader is on his knees, Ahsoka lying on the ground using all her momentum to slash the mask of Darth Vader. A very cold scene right after is present, as Vader's voice echoes Anakin.
Ahsoka.
She comes into realization that it was really her brother, that she refers to him by that label since the Clone Wars. She tries to sway him back to the light, referring to the scene where she leaves Anakin and she won't make that same mistake like she did before.
Understand wanting to walk away from the Order.
But Anakin retreats back into his shell, saying these chilling words.
Then you will die.
And knowing his instinct is to kill his apprentice makes this scene even more powerful. At this point, Anakin is far gone to the point his apprentice that he deeply cared for can't even bring him back to the light. Now this was a nice conclusion to the two characters' story, and honestly if Ahsoka didn't survive this fight, easily the scene would have been much more emotionally broken given how the two were side by side during the Clone Wars. These two would definitely meet again in the Ahsoka show. It's good to see Hayden again as Anakin Skywalker. He still has it. There's a Force Ghost sequence, or whatever they like to call it, in Mortis. The episode explores Ahsoka's feelings of guilt for being the reason behind Anakin's demise and her fear of leaving a legacy of death, war, and destruction for herself.
What do you want? You want me to be more serious?
The show really doesn't explain too well what's happening, but it's more in between the lines. She realized she could make her own decisions at the end rather than living in the shadow of her master, who pretty much
You've learned nothing. Live or die.
ended the entire Jedi. The sequence goes to the most important parts of her past and going through several significant fights that she had to overcome. At the end of it, she decided to live, and that it was all Anakin's decision at the end to turn to the dark side, and Ahsoka had no influence to it.
There's hope for you yet.
Bring me the passengers. I want them alive.
This is where we pave into the original trilogy, where we get to see Vader interrogate some rebels. Remember, this movie is A New Hope. This was our very first look to the character, and Vader became the icon from the moment he and his stormtroopers busted through those blast doors and choked the motherfucker out because he couldn't tell his location to the plans and giving him menacing command orders to his troops. But he does know his place, as when he's at the round table with all the commanding officers, a character named Tarkin you might recognize from the Clone Wars TV show or even Rogue One and Rebels. If you're one of the newer fans of the franchise, he immediately takes control of the room, the same room Vader is in. Now this does not diminish Vader as a character or his role, but it shows the Empire have standards. The professional have structure. There aren't bitchy, whiny commanders who get tossed around like they're nothing from their lower ranked comrades. Shows how intimidating the Empire is to the rebels. Tarkin doesn't scream at Leia for the rebel base location, he just stands and calmly interrogates her, and proceeds to blow up her planet of Alderaan. Fucking genius writing. Even when Vader was choking a commander for speaking out of turn about his culture, Tarkin commands to release him. Vader doesn't argue the command, but keeps his professionalism.
Release him. As you wish.
Near the end of the film, Vader confronts Obi-Wan for the third time in their life, and is a little more cautious, less arrogant. Both adapt to slow fight style, probably because of the time A New Hope was made, the late 70s. But there's enough evidence to justify what was taking place in the duel between them. Vader did not want to lose for the third time. He wanted Obi-Wan dead for good this time, and so he did. But unfortunately, Obi-Wan did become more powerful than Darth Vader could possibly imagine. Vader throughout A New Hope is merely in pursuit of the plans and taking down the Rebel Alliance for good until he stumbles upon a farm boy with excellent pilot skills. Obi-Wan has been guarding this boy from the moment Padme died and of a broken heart, when the gang of Han, Leia, and Luke Skywalker witnessed the two former brothers doing it out. Obi-Wan sacrificed himself by allowing Vader to strike him with the final blow, but this was only an attempt to become one with the Force while trying to guide Luke Skywalker into becoming a Jedi. hence the smile he gave before Vader did his final strike. The Yavin base was immediately located by the Empire after sending a tracking beacon on the Millennium Falcon. Vader and his team are in immediate pursuit, but Vader is immediately caught off guard by Luke's connection to the Force, and yes, Luke Skywalker is an exceptional pilot like his father. Vader loses the dogfight, and the Death Star, well, good old Tarkin blows up with it into smithereens. The rebels win and celebrate. The Empire has taken a heavy blow, but Vader suspects a greater prize after the encounter. This leads us into Empire Strikes Back. Luke is somewhat trained. He's still trying. You got this, buddy. There we go. And Vader and the Emperor, and yes, this is the first time we get to see the Emperor in the original trilogy. After the full-scale assault on Hoth was a failed attempt to finally seize the Rebel Alliance, the Emperor senses a disturbance in the Force in the embodiment of Luke Skywalker. Vader suspects the child of Anakin Skywalker lives. Now you're beginning to wonder, like myself, why didn't Vader say anything to the Emperor when he basically lied about killing his children alongside his wife? Well, he can justify his actions of not saying anything. To the matter of fact, the damage has already been done. Vader probably is in a lot of anger under the mask that he can't lash out, but knowing Luke is his son, it's a driving force for him, because once Luke heads to Bespin to save his friends, after training for some time with Yoda on Dagobah, I think it was about 3 weeks, he meets Darth Vader for the first time face to face. Luke carrying some of that arrogance his father once had before him. Luke is carrying some of that arrogance his father had once, believes he can challenge him one-on-one, but nope, Vader completely destroys Luke. And he isn't trying to kill him, by the way. He's a prize to the Emperor, and the only big blow he does was chopping his hand off, just like Dooku did. Vader, knowing Luke is his gateway to a new life, wishes to train Luke in the ways of the Sith and taking down the Emperor once and for all. A great parallel to Revenge of the Sith, and where Anakin pleads to Padme to join, wishing to overthrow the Chancellor at the time, as he believes Vader killed his father. We get to see the iconic scene unfold. Luke is in disbelief Vader is his father. We get this iconic scene where Darth Vader sees these iconic lines.
No, I am your father. No!
Luke doesn't believe him, and he just throws himself away, as he still believes Vader killed his father. Vader's master, the Emperor, arrives to oversee the creation of his second Death Star, as well as the progression of pursuing Luke Skywalker, who's at this point has become a very well-trained Jedi and a much more wise and focused man. He receives confirmation from a dying Yoda and Obi-Wan that Vader is indeed his father. Obi-Wan begins to tell Luke from his perspective that Anakin was seduced into being the man he is, and the friend he trained no longer ceased to exist. Both Yoda and Obi-Wan suggest Luke to face his father, but Luke doesn't have the spirits to fight a member in his family. Luke also learns that he has a twin sister, which makes this scene awkward to watch. Luke is in shock and explains this to Leia later in the movie, and what's funny is apparently it's stated that she somehow felt a connection way before this reveal. She doesn't explain the specifics of when, but God, I hope it was after the scene. Anyways, Luke finally accepts his destiny of facing his father and surrenders himself to Darth Vader. Luke tries to persuade Darth Vader into coming back to the light, stating the Emperor hasn't driven the light from him fully, but Anakin claims it's too late for him. He's already committed dark sins to the point even he believes there's no hope for him. Vader takes Luke to the Emperor, and Palpatine does what he does best and begins to manipulate Luke to join the dark side. Luke is questioning on what he should do, but Palpatine mentions Luke's friends are dying in battle, and he immediately snaps because he can't witness losing the people he cares about, just like his father. But Vader blocks Luke's strike, and I always loved the theory of the glimpse of Anakin stopping Luke from making the same mistake he did 20 plus years ago that brought him to who he is right now. But just like his duel with Ahsoka, he immediately retreats back into his shell. A beautiful choreographed fight between the two take place. Luke being more resilient towards Darth Vader and much more proficient in his combat abilities to closely match Darth Vader. The score by Williams demonstrates the level of tension between the two, with the laugh of Palpatine in the background, who's responsible for the self-destruction of Anakin Skywalker. Luke is cornered and hiding in the dark, the mysterious scenery of his face being half in the light and half in the dark, showing the conflict that will transpire. Vader, understanding the care Luke has for his friends, he pressures and threatens Luke that if he will not join, Leia would basically be a student of Darth Vader, after realizing she is the twin sister of Luke Skywalker. It was a perfect opportunity for Vader to channel in Luke's inner rage, which he did, and the scream with the beautiful music and the clash of the two sabers. Luke, not holding back the fit of rage, chops Vader's hand. Palpatine is manipulating Luke to finally strike his father and become one with the dark side. But Luke is standing his ground, not repeating the same mistake his father made, submitting himself to the devil that caused all this. Palpatine is playing his cards perfectly, knowing that he's a big threat. Palpatine playing his cards perfectly, knowing that Luke is a very big threat to him. He needs to be taken out. While Anakin is looking at his son being burnt by force lightning, slowly contemplating whether or not he should help his own blood, someone who he just met, or continue being the Dark Lord of the Sith's pet, a man he sold his life to. Vader, finally making his stand, lifts Palpatine and tosses him down the reactor shaft, finally ending it all. The cost of doing so, his suit was so sensitive to all that power of force lightning, to the point now it's barely functioning. But for Anakin, it did not matter. He couldn't save his wife from death, but at least he saved his children. Luke carrying his own father while the crew around the Death Star are running for their lives, lays his father before boarding him, but Anakin tells Luke to help him take his mask off. Love that George implied that it's not a helmet, but Vader sees it as his mask, covering Anakin Skywalker, finally seeing his son with his own eyes, knowing it's too late to save himself. Luke does what he's told, Anakin probably finally smiling for the first time after a long time, because his son has finally freed him from the shackles, giving Luke a few words to tell his sister that he was right about having a good in him, ending all of the pain and suffering that he endured, and finally finishing what he was always meant to accomplish, ending the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. But he couldn't do it without his son believing in him, and now he can finally rest. The rebels finally blew up the Death Star, and the Empire's tyranny of the galaxy was finally over. A symbolic funeral for Vader takes place with only Luke in attendance, as he was the only one with knowledge of what Vader went through, cause well, even I wouldn't want it to mass murdering killing machine's funeral, one who I have no connection with nor understanding of what transpired. Murder is murder, but it's understandable for Luke Skywalker to be attending, cause Luke feels sympathetic towards a man who fell into the dark path, as even he almost crossed that boundary. Luke finally lights the pile of wood covering Anakin's body into flames, a neat parallel to when Vader was officially born in Mustafar. After the funeral, he joins his friends in a victory celebration and looks ahead to spot a young Anakin Skywalker who is now one with the Force, standing with Yoda and Obi-Wan. Yes, I know it was originally Sebastian Shaw, I'm just referring to the new canon, and the Chosen One arc, or I like to call it the Broken One arc, in relation to Anakin Skywalker's story, has finally come full circle. George created Vader with no idea of him having a past. He was just taken as a big bad guy in A New Hope. Obviously the movie was a success and they made 2 more films, and George brilliantly implemented a rich background for Darth Vader, of him being this once great Jedi who has fallen into the dark path and is redeemed by his son at the end. His story was told through Obi-Wan, and later in the trilogy we got a better understanding of what transpired of Luke's father. Yet there's missing pieces like what was the cause of his downfall, who was Luke's mother, what the was the Clone Wars. So much world building and events being talked about in this one singular trilogy. George made the decision to show the fans on how the story of Anakin was played out. The prequels were introduced, and yes, they got a lot of heat. It wasn't what fans expected. The major complaints was Anakin was too whiny, as there were very major complaints that I highlighted early on in this video. They expected more of a badass tale of the character, and his fall was too abrupt. Now some of these major complaints are understandable, especially with Padme, and as including myself, I found their relationship to be very poorly developed, and very off in some areas. But if we look past that and just look at the direction that was intended, Anakin's fall does make sense. Anakin was brought into the Order at the age of 9. He already has this big weight he has to carry of him being the supposed chosen one. He never had a father, he had to leave his mother, and probably came from a place where social life isn't all that great since he was a slave. Now, he has the weight of being the chosen one at a very young age to end the Sith for once and for all. He falls in love with someone, but attachments are forbidden, and he must hide his relationship with the Center. He isn't able to save his mother, as the Jedi are holding him back from expressing his true power and using it to save his loved ones. He later envisions his wife being in deep pain nearing her death. Later in his life, the Jedi just refuse to accommodate his demands, which potentially lead him to unlocking secret powers to save the ones he truly loves, all in the while being manipulated into believing the dark path can solve his problems, which he does follow, but he ends up losing everything. He gets burnt into a crisp and is in painful soup for the rest of his life. And a very shitty one, for the man just who wants to live with the people he loves can understand why he complains, as he isn't in control of himself. Once you watch the Clone Wars, it delves more into the poor, toxic structure of the Jedi Order. Their flaws are somewhat responsible for the path Anakin takes. Corrupt politics, high expectations, and a very toxic group with convoluted morals. All he wanted was a life away from slavery with the people he cares about, but he got sent into another life of hell, tried to escape that life, and well, he lost everything. Anakin was a slave on Tatooine, a slave to the Jedi Order, and a slave to the Empire until his son set him free.